Now, back to the Frontier Freedom Hour with Jeff Hunt, sponsored by Centennial Institute at Colorado Christian University. Here's Jeff Hunt.
All right, on your ballot, Proposition HH. You're going to have to check yes or no. And so we're going to help you today on the Frontier Freedom Hour. And we've got the expert, Ben Murrey, who serves as a director of the Independence Institute's Fiscal Policy Center, working to promote fiscal responsibility in the Colorado government. It's about the only thing we have left in this state. Keeps us from drifting into Portlandia. So thank God we have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and we have experts like this, folks at the Independence Institute that are fighting so hard to protect the fiscal sanity of this state. So Proposition HH is up. We gave kind of a rough overview during the first segment. So if you missed that, go back to the podcast, frontierfreedomradio.com. You can download that here. So you wanted to highlight some aspects of this that may not be evident as people are reading it. So you talked a little bit about, I believe it was tax relief for seniors in backfill counties, right? Can you dive into a little bit of some of those issues there, Ben?
Yeah, I can. But for anybody who just hopped on, I want to make sure they understand where we're at, right? We're talking about Proposition HH, which is a tax increase. Now, they're calling it a property tax relief, but it's actually a tax increase, right? And connecting the dots here, right? What we know is that the folks in charge, and by the way, Independence Institute, where I work, we're not a partisan organization, but it is a fact that a certain party is in control in this state, and so they're the ones making the decision. So the party that's in control has the governor's mansion, has the House and the Senate. That's the Democrat Party. Their party platform says their number one priority under taxation, their taxation category, is repealing TABOR, repealing the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, so that there's no limit on how much government can grow and how much of your money they can take. That's their number one priority. Okay? So the party whose number one priority under taxation is to take away this limit on how much of your money they can tax, right? They also put this on the ballot, Proposition HH, okay? They're saying it's property tax relief, but keep in mind, what's their number one priority, okay? And they also got to write the ballot language. The very people who want to repeal TABOR and who failed at doing so when they asked you directly are the ones who got to write the ballot language for Proposition HH. So the first thing people need to know is when they read the ballot language, it's not telling you what the measure actually does. The measure is a tax increase. It increases your taxes by billions of dollars by taking away your TABOR refunds. It will not result in lower property taxes.
And this is so it's a hard no. Just to be clear for everyone, it is a hard no on Proposition HH. So I do want to jump back a little bit. Gallagher. So a lot of people are trying to figure out how we even got into this position. Why are my property taxes so high all of a sudden?
I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but
it's okay here.
Yeah, it's okay here. This is a safe space for conspiracy theorists. No, what is a conspiracy, right? A conspiracy is, well, some people got together and planned something in advance. It's really not that a conspiracy isn't necessarily a crazy thing. And I think that's what happened here. I think people got together. I think Governor Polis and the Democrats in power in the state got together in advance and said, hey, let's think through this and plan this out in advance. Let's figure out how we're going to do this. What are the pieces we need to put in place to, in 2019, they tried to repeal TABOR refunds kind of directly. They just asked people, and people said no. And they said, okay, that didn't work. We need to put a plan in place to do this incrementally over time. And they came up with a plan. And so in 2020, the first step of that plan was to repeal the Gallagher Amendment.
Which we were opposed to at the Centennial Institute. Were you all opposed to that?
We were opposed to it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And what the Gallagher Amendment did, this gets a little into the weeds about how property taxes works, but how they work. But I think this is worth going over. So if the tax rate is fixed, say it's fixed at 7%, then as your home's value rises, your tax bill goes up at the exact same rate that your home value rises. So if your home value goes up 40%, your tax bill goes up 40% if the rate is fixed. The rate's 7%. 7% of, let's do some quick math. What's a 40% increase from, say, $400,000? That's $160,000. That's about the increase we saw over the last 2 years since the last assessment period. I know I'm getting into the weeds here. Don't freak out. Don't leave us. So you get a $160,000 increase in your tax bill, in your property value. So that's a 40% increase. So now you're taxed at 7% of $400,000 plus 7% of the $160,000 increase. So that's going to be a 40% increase in your tax bill. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so what Gallagher did for residential properties, for homeowners, is it said as your home's value goes up over time, the tax rate has to come down in order to control the growth in your property tax bill, right? So you have that offset. Think of it as a balance beam or something, right? Value goes up, okay, we need to lower the rate to offset. So that way, when your property value goes up 40%, your property tax bill doesn't go up 40%. Now, it still did allow an increase in taxes over time, but say your property value went up 40%, maybe your property tax bill would go up 4%, right? There's a lot more to Gallagher, and frankly, Gallagher wasn't perfect policy. There are better ways to do the property tax code, but it was a protection that existed that kept the growth in residential property taxes in check, okay? And in 2020, the legislature, basically the same legislature, pretty much the same leadership that is putting HH on the ballot, put Amendment B on the ballot, which asked voters to repeal the Gallagher Amendment to the Constitution. Now, you can't change the Constitution without getting voter approval, so they've got to go to voters. And here's how that measure started. When they asked voters, they said, without increasing property tax rates, to preserve funding for local districts to provide fire protection and police and ambulance and kindergarten, right? So without increasing property tax rates, that was the very clever language that gave people the impression that, hey, we're going to finally, give the funding that we've been promising for decades to fire protection and schools and ambulances. We're going to finally give that funding to all these things and the puppies and the unicorns and everything else. And we're not going to increase property tax rates when we do it. And people thought, oh, well, that's great. We're finally going to get funding for all these essential services, and it's not going to increase my taxes. Oh, that's not what they said. They said it's not going to increase your tax rates, which means, and here's the weird thing is, but yes, it didn't increase the tax rate. What it did is it repealed the constitutional amendment that forced the rate down as home values went up. So it locked in the rate. It didn't increase the rate. It locked in the tax rate so that you no longer had that offsetting protection, right? I wish people could see me like frantically moving my hands to demonstrate this offset thing. Yeah. Right? So they could, if they wanted people to actually understand what they were being asked, they would have said, shall the state constitution be amended to get rid of a protection that keeps property tax growth in check or something like that, right? Yeah. They didn't say that. They said without increasing property tax rates, but rates is the key word. So they persuaded Coloradans to repeal the Gallagher Amendment, this protection they had, using very deceptive means because they get to write the ballot language. Now keep in mind, in Colorado, the legislature can refer something to the ballot or citizens can refer something to the ballot. So in 2020, John Caldera, the president of Independence Institute, as a citizen, went and put Proposition 116 on the ballot, which asked voters, hey, shall we reduce the state income tax rate? And voters said yes, so we reduced the state income tax rate. We did the same thing in 2022. John Caldera, president of Independence Institute, put another measure on the ballot. Shall we reduce this income tax rate again? And voters said yes, let's do that. When we put something as citizens on the ballot, we have to go through a very strict process, and we're not allowed to campaign using the ballot language. We can't write ballot language that's manipulative, okay? We're not legally allowed to do so. When the legislature puts something on the ballot, they're not subject to those rules. They can write anything they want. They play by a completely different set of rules. And so that's how they got that constitutional protection repealed in 2020, and that's what they're doing with Proposition HH, which they're calling a tax cut, even though it's actually a tax increase.
Are your eyes open yet, Jamie?
Oh my gosh.
Michael's sitting there. He looks exhausted. He looks like every other voter in the state of Colorado who's like, something was just forced upon me that I didn't understand, and now I have less money. Like, at the end of the day, that's essentially what this does. Wow, Ben, that is the clearest explanation of what has happened the last few years and why we're in this position. And I think that's a very clear reason why you have to vote no on this. This is manipulative at the end of the day.
It's extortion, right? So they created the crisis by repealing the Gallagher Amendment. Your property taxes are going up, 40% or whatever it is in your individual situation because they repealed the Gallagher Amendment. Okay? If the politicians had just done nothing, if they just kept their hands out of it, right, then you wouldn't have this crisis at all. You wouldn't be listening to this show. I mean, right. Jeff would probably be ranting about some other conspiracy theory or something, you know? My point is that we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? And in all seriousness, like, this wouldn't be an issue if they had just done nothing. They created this crisis. And I believe, and this is where I say conspiracy, right? I'm talking about conspiracies. Like, a conspiracy just means they talked about it together in advance and planned it out and then executed, right? That's conspiracy. And I think that's what happened here is they figured out, okay, how can we get people's taper refunds? And they planned it out in advance. It's okay, step one, we need to take away this protection. Step two, we need to then use the crisis as leverage, as extortion to get people to hand over their taper refunds. And that's what you're seeing playing out here. So they've executed step one. People no longer have this protection. So now we've created this crisis. If Gallagher were still in place, property tax bills might be going up, 5% or something, right? Because they repealed Gallagher, they're now going up something like 40%. Wow. Okay.
Wow.
So take Douglas County, for example. So, and here's what they do. And here's how they get away with saying this is a property tax reduction. Because after repealing Gallagher, current law is now, the current law is now property taxes are going to go up 40% or whatever it is, right? It varies across the state, but that's current law. But it's only current law because they repealed the protection, right? When they repealed Gallagher, part of how they persuaded voters is they said, we want to repeal it so we can replace it with something better.
Talking with Ben Murrey of the Independence Institute. He serves as their director of the Fiscal Policy Center. All about Proposition HH. We'll continue this conversation when we return. You're listening to the Frontier Freedom Hour, sponsored by the Centennial Institute at Colorado Christian University.